There are two different types of visual storytelling in movies. First, the constant following of the protagonist. Second, the sequencing of shots. I would call the first type modern cinema or following, and the second type classical cinema or sequencing. In this video, I will show you the differences and what you can use for your film. With the first variant, following, the filmmaker doesn't have to worry about where the camera is placed, as he only follows the protagonist anyway and pans in with his camera wherever the protagonist is looking. It is virtually a recording of what the protagonist is doing. With the second variant, sequencing, it depends on where the camera is positioned and which framing is used to tell the story. And above all, which take is enough to tell the story, because the story is told through the editing. Here is an example for comparing. This story is to be told: a man who comes too late to work and is fired. In the following version, the protagonist is followed continuously, from getting up after the bell rings, brushing his teeth and getting dressed, to running to the metro and being fired by the boss. In the sequencing variant, the story would be told through the following shots. First shot, the alarm clock rings. Second shot, the man runs out of the house. Third shot, the man stands in front of his boss and is fired. So you only use shots that move the story forward. The viewer will imagine the rest. The following version takes much longer and runs the risk of becoming boring. But why has this narrative style become so popular? I would even say that this narrative structure is the reason why there are so many bad films. Because the unimportant things that could be deleted are left in. I think this type of storytelling has been so successful and so often used in modern movies because the scripts are more character-driven, like a reality record, which is supposed to make everything seem more realistic. It is because of this narrative style that the Steadicam becomes so popular on film sets. The sequencing variant is less character-driven and more story-driven. I think the character gets his image precisely through the events. This narrative structure is a sequence of images and tells the story in the viewer's head. The legendary Russian director Eisenstein already described and analyzed this in his theory on montage. In a nutshell, the editing tells the story. The sequencing variant only brings the shots that tell the story into the movie. Anything that is unnecessary can be deleted. Because in screenwriting there should be a number one rule, which is scene 1 is the reason for scene 2 and so on. If this rule is followed, the viewer remains engaged. But with average to bad movies, it often looks like this. Scene 1 is the reason for scene 3 or 4, but the scenes in between are just for atmosphere and don't help the story. Of course, this is often the case with the following narrative variant, as some of the protagonist's steps could be omitted, because the step itself is already clear. In my opinion, the atmosphere is built up by the plot, by what happens, and not by extra scenes to emphasize this, or to explain the character better. Once again, the character should get his image through the happenings. And please don't get me wrong, there are of course also great films in the following variant. For me, there's just a greater risk of making a scene more boring than with the sequencing method. And here a few examples from film history and the corresponding narrative structure. And I use only good examples for both variants, in my opinion. In my feature film, The Black and White Game, I mainly use the narrative structure sequencing to tell the story as simple as possible, which in my opinion is stronger and eliminates non-essential things. Nevertheless, I have one scene or two that is more typical of the following narrative structure. It is of course possible to mix both, but I want to avoid this in my future films in order to have a clear and unique film language. Check your script. In which language of the sequencing or the following should the story be told? If you want to dive deeper into this matter, I recommend the book On Directing Film by director David Mamet. Have a look at this video where I tell you more about the #1 rule of screenwriting. Thanks and see you soon.